What are the skills people really need today? In a world where change is constant and technology evolves faster than we can blink, we'd argue that it's not the hard skills that sets teams apart, it's the soft ones. But will organisations ever truly appreciate empathy, adaptability, and communication as the real power skills needed for business? Our guest today has a passion for talent management, a wealth of experience in navigating change, and a deep understanding of how that shapes human-centred cultures. But what's at the heart of all of this? People. Let's get started. Julia, welcome to In Good Company. How are you today?
I'm really well. Thank you very much for having me.
Well, thank you for being here. We really appreciate you giving us your time to be with us here today and to share your wealth of knowledge and experience. So before we get started into that, let's give our audience the opportunity to get to know you a little bit better. So why don't you introduce yourself in 60 seconds?
60 seconds-ish. I think we've just spoke about this before.
It's always ish.
Yeah. So I'm Julia Paulding. My job title is Chief People Officer. I work at an amazing mid-sized law firm, Lewis Silkin. So we really pride itself in our culture and doing things a bit differently in a people-centred way. Really proud this year to be recognised as the Lawyers Law Firm of the Year. So we got the Lawyers Law Firm of the Year award this year in 2025.
Amazing.
I've worked proudly as a people professional for over 30 years in 2025. So I know that because I received a certificate from the CIPD in May 25 saying that I had been a member for 30 years. Now, I hadn't expected that. It doesn't feel that long, but I'm really proud to have, been involved in this type of work for such a long time. My career has been solely in professional services. So I had a very long, happy time in a mid-sized UK accountancy firm called Safri prior to joining Lewis Silkin in May 2022, just after lockdown, like so many other people thinking, what comes next for me? Proud working mum as well, have been throughout my career. My daughters are now young adults, and I now have a new dependent, a huge golden doodle dog. So,
as in a puppy, or have you had them for a while?
She's 5 now, but she is my baby.
Yeah, nice. Great. Well, thank you. That's and it gives a great insight into your breadth of experience, which we're definitely going to be tapping into today. So, as you mentioned, Chief People Officer, and you've had over 20 years experience in HR and L&D.
30.
Say again, sorry?
30 years.
30. I apologise. 30, you're quite right. And so there's been enormous changes in that time and how we work and what's expected of us at work. We can all clearly see more change on the horizon. So what do you think from your perspective are some of the biggest challenges facing HR professionals today, and how do you think they can be addressed?
It's such a huge question, isn't it? It really is.
Yeah.
So what I'm going to do is...
Might as well start big, eh?
Yeah, I know. I'm going to sort of take that question and start small and work outwards, if you like. And the reason I'm going to do that is I think it might resonate with, if you've got any other people professionals that are listening in, or people in similar people roles. So I'd say, my biggest challenge at the moment is making sure, amongst everything else, that my own fantastic team is supported and enabled to deal with and facilitate and lead change when they're dealing with so much themselves. So that's sort of like starting off in a narrow way. Because if you think about it, our own ways of working are changing, our systems, we're dealing with the changing needs of and expectations of our stakeholders, and, the changes on the business driven by a whole range of factors. But actually, in our world, I don't do my job on my own. I do it through an amazing group of people. So I think for me, that's one of my biggest challenges. And then if I work outwards really more widely, for me, and this is, how I like to always conduct myself and the way that I operate at work. So with so much change going on, and we see it, don't we? I've got a list in a minute of some of the big things. Being alive to the impact on teams and individuals, like that real personal impact, because at the end of the day, where I work, it's all about people. And really trying to focus on this when we're planning change initiatives. And we don't always get it right. We're still learning. So try not to lose our focus on what I've heard somebody recently say really well on, our focus on the brilliant basics. And so they are equipping our leaders and line managers with skills to support their teams, doubling down on communication in all its forms, thinking about engagement, feedback, listening to people, not losing that trust that, between different parts of the organisation as we navigate today's landscape. And then I think finally understanding that people are individuals. They have individual needs, they have individual preferences, and they'll have individual concerns. So I think really it's really thinking about the individual and team impact of everything that's going on around us. And it's not easy to do.
No. And I think what's I'm picking up on there is that, with having that awareness of those human-centered aspects and paying attention to those internally, they're going to have that knock-on effect and that reverberation out into your client base as well, I would assume.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I agree with that. And that's how we like to do things at Lewis Silkin, because we really feel that our happy lawyers and happy people who work with our lawyers here at Lewis Silkin, we are better for our clients if we're thriving ourselves.
Absolutely.
So we absolutely take that to the heart of everything we do here.
And in terms of, have you got any examples of like, in the sort of questions there, it was talking about challenges.
Yeah.
And would you say that there have been particular challenges to get everybody in line with that basic, the brilliant basics as you described, or has that kind of come fairly naturally?
I think it comes fairly naturally to us, and that's the reason I joined this organisation, because we're all around our culture. We like to be distinct. Our ethos of bravery and kindness really goes to the heart of what we do. It isn't just something we say. And so we've always set ourselves apart, we feel, through our culture, through, looking at collaboration, through rewarding collaboration at the highest levels. So I think here, it's something that does come naturally, but we can't take it for granted. You never can. You have to always be alive to things that might be going on and just not losing sight of those human touch points that are really important.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's a lot to be said around, we mentioned change in the introduction as well. Change is, we've all heard the phrase that change is constant. The thing is constant is change, and it's so true. And I think particularly now it feels like there's a lot of change that's happening exponentially. And we've all heard that 2-letter phrase that's on our doorstep and in our realities at the moment. Do you feel that with HR and L&D teams are kind of at the heart of that change, aren't they? And we were talking off air before recording, and you said that the average person is dealing with 5 times the amount of change. What does that look like in reality in the day-to-day, and how can leaders help them navigate this?
So we were talking about this before the call, and it made me to reflect. And I thought, I'm just going to make a list of all the different things we're dealing with, and we know some of it. So where we work, when we work, how we work, the impact of those choices, which can be driven by tech, but not solely by tech. How we manage and support hybrid teams as a result of that. How we collaborate with each other and that absolute need to collaborate. Our ability we could be on 24/7. What does that mean from a well-being perspective, from a communication perspective? And how do we deal with so much noise? I call it noise. It really is, from so many different information sources and systems of ways of communicating all the time. I think that the less certain world causes well-being also to be impacted. That's a change. So, work-life balance is so much more important than ever before. But how do we achieve it with all of these other ways of working that we have? We've also got more generations working side by side, which I actually love. But it's something that, no other time since in my working life we've had to deal with that in such a way. I think this sort of polarization of views in society that we see, that in the world seems a little bit more fractious around us, a lot more fractious, and being alive to that in the workplace. What does that mean to people? How do they feel? The expectations are, there's such a long list, I'm nearly done. Expectations of individuals for, to be treated as individuals. So, we hear about the changed nature of the psychological contract, and it really is. So people want some autonomy, they expect feedback in a different way, they like a personalised approach, they want to choose how they learn, where they learn, when they communicate with people. And I think sort of like coming to the end of it, our expectations around trust in our employer, which is so important, and transparency, because in our daily lives, there's more transparency, isn't there? You can look at Trustpilot to see what's going. It's, this expectation for that. And then I do think that the importance of personal values being aligned to your employer's work values are really important as well.
Yeah.
So this sort of purposeful way of interacting in the workplace, it's so important to attract, retain, engage, all of those good things, all of our amazing people. And then I've added finally to the list, I think something that I'm seeing at the moment is there's a real pressure more recently to get reward and benefits right more than ever before. And I think that from two aspects. So where people maybe aren't feeling as wealthy, in the economy, and also there is a sort of a need to personalize our reward packages as much as we can competitively. Right. So I think that I'm thinking that that's a difference as well. It used to be back in the day there would be the annual salary review. It would be an amount, or reward packages were pretty static, and now we've got all of this choice, and there is a pressure, I think, at the moment for us to really get that right for our employees in a way I haven't seen in my very long career.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, and so as I said,
can you remind me of the question around that? Because I got so lost in my list of how things are different. It's around HR, wasn't it, and managing that.
And I think that's it though, because what you've done there is highlight the challenge that leaders do face, is that it's so much more than just project focus and deliverables and all that kind of stuff. There's so much that is on leaders' plates these days to navigate the work that isn't the job in the job role, isn't necessarily in the job description, because often it's like you say, well, you need to be able to deliver this and have these skills and things like that, and the actual the role of a leader is so much more than that, isn't it? So
I mean, I'd say for that. So that I didn't even go into AI in that list, did I? I just said, I'm sure we'll talk about that. But I think for leaders, it's important that we're all helping each other and we're all open to learn, because we're all still learning. This is still relatively new, isn't it? I don't think there's anybody who can say, we've got this magic formula for how we unlock this and deal with this and, make sure that everybody's day is really, we're filtering out all of the noise to do with change and different expectations. So I think it's really important that we're all still learning together, and we're working with our leaders to listen to their challenges, to help them, to bring out what's working well and really enhance that and amplify that. And also, again, back to my brilliant basics, I think that helping our leaders to never forget that we, all of us as individuals, nearly all of us as individuals, we want to feel heard. We want to feel valued at work in our jobs. We want to have the opportunity to learn, maybe to progress for a lot of people. And we really want to have work environments where we can enjoy working with our colleagues. I think, and that is the brilliant basics. So leadership hasn't really changed in that respect. We all want to feel valued. We want to be seen to do a good job. No matter what we're dealing with, those things I feel still remain. And I think that actually we can forget with so much complex work, different initiatives, deliverable systems, tech, that, there some things will not change. Things like communication, communicate in lots of different forms. And I think sometimes we're in danger of getting that wrong when we're focusing on some of the, exciting new initiatives.
And I think another thing to pick up on there, actually, sorry to interrupt, but is that, and we've said this before in previous episodes, that leadership is, and I think for a long time will be, innately human. And I think with the sort of exponential growth of AI, it'll be interesting to observe how that, because we're already seeing things like AI coaches, for example, and people using it. And I think that, there's definitely a place, I think there needs to be a acknowledgement that human skills shouldn't be forgotten. So, and which leads me quite neatly into my next question, but I want to hold before I move on to that, because I feel like I've got another thing to add.
Just going into AI, really, I was talking to one of our amazing clients fairly recently, and they said their terminology for hybrid working now isn't a combination of work at home and the office. It's working with AI. So it's human and agent. That's the hybrid, which just blows my mind, really. But it isn't such a stretch, is it, for some of us? So, I think it's really important that we, different systems are going to change, aren't they? So what we're using tech for today, but what won't change is the impact felt by humans on different systems, or their worry around, is this system that's coming along going to take my job away or significantly change my job? So at Lewis Silkin, we love experimenting with tech. We're a creative organization. We like to be innovative. So we're embracing the opportunities that AI may bring in a way, but we've said really clearly, we're not looking to, it's not about reducing our workforce size. It's about augmenting what we do. It's about enhancing what we do. And we're really trying to, address those concerns. But we could do more, if I'm honest. This is a constant journey. Just because you said something a few months ago, it doesn't mean you can't reinforce those engagement and reassurance messages, more frequently.
And I think that transparency is really important as well. That people within Lewis Silkin and teams in businesses all around the world, that if leaders within the teams can be transparent, and it doesn't feel like there's an ulterior motive with certain changes and things like that, and feels like with change initiatives, it's important that change is being done with rather than to, within people in the organization, for people to get behind those initiatives. And I think obviously you've had change initiatives that have been successful, and there have been ones that haven't been quite as successful, and there's always learning opportunities from those, isn't there?
And that's right. It has to be, doesn't it? If changes, I think it's important to accept that things aren't always going to go well, or you'll learn through something that maybe didn't go so well, and then you apply that going forward. But I sort of think, rounding that up, really investing in our leadership and our management capability has got to be the way forward, helping them to understand how to get the best out of people, how to help people, how to sort of filter out as much of the noise as they can, so that we can sort of all drive forward. I think that really investing in our people, in our humans, has to be, as well as the systems and as well as the AI and other initiatives, has to be the way forward.
Definitely. Well, one way that's done is through skills development. We talked in the intro about soft skills, which are what we're often hearing is called power skills more recently. So what are the power skills that you believe that people need, and how do you help people build them?
I like power skills because I've always hated the term soft skills, because they're not difficult. They're not easy, are they? They're not the easy thing. I have to say, I'm going to caveat my answer with, these are the power skills as they relate to my world in professional services.
Of course.
So obviously it'll be different for different organizations, but really calling out for me. So collaboration, that need to be able to collaborate, and that really involves excellent communication skills in all their forms. So huge emphasis on listening. And it's so transferable a skill. It's important for not only when we deal internally with each other, to make magic happen internally, but when we're speaking to our clients, advisory skills, high degree of listening. I'd say also for our organization, continuous learning. So that involves other power skills, if you like. So that curious mindset, that open-minded, to open to change, to be open to learn by doing and learning from that, adaptability, really. So I think that's something that's really important here. And I think it flows really from communication. I don't know if it's a separate category. I think everything links together, really. But that ability to really be happy and willing to share knowledge and feedback with other people, and also be receptive and open and really celebrate receiving other people's knowledge and feedback. Also here, so creativity and problem solving. And really some of the leadership skills, the competencies here are, just really the empathy, dialing that up, really being alive to what individuals need. So I think they're, for us, the ones that we've been working on, I suppose, celebrating, rewarding at Lewis Silkin. And previously, this mirrors my previous experience in professional services as well.
Well, it's interesting because as you were listing those, it reminded me, and it feels like a bit of a shameless plug here, so apologies. But we've just been working on in the past year of our leadership playbook, which undoubtedly will be in the link of today's episode. But literally everything, pretty much that you've listed there, is included in that leadership playbook. So to go back to your earlier point of, this is what it's like in your world. I would argue that it's like that because this, as we've talked about, this is all sort of human skills that can really emphasize the it's not the word I'm looking for, but it can really enhance a leader's skill set. Absolutely. And so to give each one of these things some time and have an awareness of these things, and self-awareness
it's good to hear that we're in line with what you're finding.
Yeah, absolutely. So it just goes to show that we're all singing from the same hymn sheet, and that to use that phrase. But we'll obviously make sure you get a link yourself, so you can kind of have a look and see how much those are aligned. Yeah. And I completely agree. Obviously, I'm going to say I completely agree with all of them, having based on what I've just said. But I think there's so much of these, and it's easy to overlook them. I think that's possibly where maybe why they've been given the term soft skills in the past, because it is kind of, some of these feel like they're sort of common sense, and But I think what I've and you're right, and particularly I think in other sectors and worlds, that if you find yourself being promoted into a leadership role, the chances are that you've never really had a formal sort of education in these things and where they matter to being in a leadership role. So I think that it's entirely, I think you're right that by calling them power skills, they are adding tools to a toolkit, aren't they, of things that you can draw on, and to give them focus, I think is really important.
I think it's essential, and I think that it's got more pronounced over the years. I feel that so with our lawyers, there's a given, there's an expectation that they will be amazing technical lawyers. We'll help them, we'll support them, we'll have the structures in place, but that's a given. That sets them apart. So as they progress and develop, and it was the same for where I was before. So almost the technical nature of their role. I'm not downplaying how important it is to build up that experience in the right way. Yeah. But it's those other parts that really will set somebody apart and help our firm to develop.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, you could give the example of a surgeon, couldn't you?
Yeah.
Because a surgeon will be technically absolutely amazing, but it'll be the bedside skills, the bedside manner, that really makes the difference, that leaves that patient, I think that's quite a poignant example, because, everybody's experienced that in some way, shape or form.
Yeah.
Where, it's, that's where these things, listening, empathy, continuous learning, adaptability, communication, all of those things are so crucial to provide reassurance, and it will be very similar to your world.
That is good to hear. I think that and how we amplify those, how we develop those, that's the next challenge, really, isn't it? Or is it a challenge? Because in today's world, actually, what we do have so many learning experiences, don't we? All presenting themselves through different cross-functional projects and different ways of collaborating. Because we're hybrid, we're having to learn to communicate more exceptionally than ever before in different formats. Right. So we can just emphasize what we need and reward what we need, I think. So, being from, back in the day, a more static kind of environment of a learning curriculum and things like that, we have so many opportunities now to develop the skills we need through, focusing on mentoring and coaching and, putting together cross-functional collaboration and problem-solving groups. And, there's always so many challenges to solve in any organization at the moment, really, giving opportunities for peer feedback, lessons learned, opportunities here at Lewis Silk, and we're great with secondments. And, so I think it's just recognizing what we need, recognizing that what we need is an evolution as well. It's going to keep evolving, staying at top of that, and not being too formal in the way we're saying, you will learn this. Yeah. For example, I keep hearing, one of the skills in today's modern society is resilience. Oh, how do you develop resilience? Well, my mind is you develop resilience within a workplace setting by having really good line managers, having psychological safety, knowing that you can try something and it can go wrong maybe and you'll learn from it. But actually you've learned from it and that will build you up for the next time. So I think that, there's not a formula for developing these. It's not like a technical syllabus or something. It's just about being alive to the opportunities we have to really strengthen and celebrate where we get it right.
And just as you were talking there, I was thinking like that all of these things, particularly the learning, the mindset, should be every level of the business as well. Because I think, again, listening. Whenever we talk about developing, it often sounds like we're talking about people that are junior in the business and bringing them up but actually it's completely across, every level, isn't it?
Do you know what I think the more senior I've become, the more I learn, the more I problem solve, the more complexity is in my world. And, I often say to my team, today's a CPD day. And that, sometimes it's a bit daunting, but actually it's, continuing professional development. It's there. It's all around us at the moment. So you're absolutely 100%. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah. I'm going to move us on to my next question and go. And again, it kind of refers back to a lot of our conversation already, but we talk about change and we often fall into that narrative of change being a challenge. But as you've kind of already described, brilliant things can happen when things do change. So how do you flip that script? How have you done that in Lewis Silkin, and what are some of the positives that you're seeing right now?
Okay, so I can't take for granted that some people find change more difficult than others, and sometimes when we haven't completely cleared the path or signposted properly, it's going to be difficult for people. But actually, the sort of flipping the script, or the way that we can look at it, is that it is an incredible time for learning, isn't it? So I've already sort of touched on that. It's an incredible time for learning, for sharing information, for working with different people. It's an incredible time to develop new knowledge and new skills. The other thing that really stands out for me as well from a workplace experience perspective, or a work experience perspective, is that we're able to accommodate individuals and individual work needs in a way that we haven't been able to up until fairly recently. And I think that has to be good. I'm going to heavily caveat this because I know it doesn't happen in all circumstances. It has to be good for inclusion. It has to give us an opportunity to really double down on inclusion. And the example that really stands out for me is working parents. As a working mum myself, we can actually shape our work experiences to accommodate people, different people in the workforce. Not, I've much of my career was, spent in an environment, a lovely environment, but it was based on presenteeism and being able to be there and work long hours, etc. So I think that actually being able to individualize and tailor people's work experiences to accommodate more people and more people to progress has to be a massive positive. I'm really, really happy most of the time with this. We've got the opportunity at the moment to have instant access to things. So actually we can access resources, information more quickly and more effectively than we have been able to do in the past. And, whilst we've got to be careful that we don't overwhelm ourselves with trying to get done too quickly, actually that's a massive benefit I've seen over the last few years, and we're getting much better at that. So really I think that, and the other thing I would say is in terms of where we are at the moment, there's so much potential for us to keep doing more good, so that, looking at how we can adapt our working lives and working preferences using tech, using flexibility, using this ability to personalize, to make better changes going forward into the future. So I think that's probably how I see it, with the biggest, I think, opportunity being the learning one for me.
Yeah. And it was interesting what you're applying what we talked about already about those sort of soft/power skills, where you were talking about inclusion and being a working mum. It sounds straight away, what I'm hearing is a lack of empathy in that culture, potentially. And that's an opportunity therefore to develop that, and understanding where people are at and where, outside of work is, I think, nowadays, and particularly with newer generations that are coming in, I think that's already a change that we're seeing.
It's essential, isn't it?
Yeah, there's a much stronger narrative around, I think, things like empathy and sort of, like you say, well-being and what's going on outside of work is is influencing, I think, what's going on inside more so than ever. There was, I think, and I speak as a sort of a generation that's kind of in the middle. That there's still that thing of like, you leave your personal life at home. There's still the sort of remnants of that still going on, and when you're at work, it's work, and when you're at home, it's it's very much a dividing line. But I think nowadays we're seeing a much bigger shift, particularly with newer generations, where there's that really understanding what's going on outside of work makes in fact, again, another accidental but slightly on purpose segue into my next question. So with the fact that I'm bringing up generational differences, what other people, what other challenges are you seeing, or perhaps not challenges but differences are presenting themselves that you've noticed and that you're working on?
I think people surprise me, actually. So I think that, sometimes that we've got to make sure we challenge perceptions, don't make assumptions, because, for example, in terms of adoption of tech, you might think that, it's going to be an older, younger attitude divide, but sometimes quite often it isn't.
Yeah.
It's, some of our most enthusiastic adopters of tech here are older, and they're really passionate. What you do find, though, is generally older people will be more senior, so they have less time to experiment, try things out. I think, for me, I think that it's really important to make sure we're all encouraged to challenge assumptions and embrace those differences. I mean, I think here at Lewis Silkin, we all seem to, I haven't seen that tension between the generations. I think we're very alive to being respectful, and obviously a lot of work we do with our clients is around people, and so maybe we're enlightened. I don't know, though, but I think it's really—
again, I would say that, again, speaking with you over the past half an hour, what continues to be that red thread is the strong culture, and that there's the people within Lewis Silkin. This is from what you're saying, is if they've got those brilliant basics completely nailed, there's a strong sense of all of those power skills within teams. There's an awareness of all of these things, that it brings that culture that then allows for a space of learning and a space of giving space, I suppose, to embrace perspectives from everywhere in the business.
Yes.
And I think that's like a very special place to be in, I think, because a lot of organizations probably don't have that.
You know what? We try so hard. We don't always get it right. We really don't. But I think one thing we do well here is we try so hard to listen. We try so hard to be welcome to feedback, to, know. And I think also to recognize that we still need to not take anything for granted, to improve. But also, people work here predominantly because of the culture. They're attracted to us, obviously, because of our excellent work and the amazing clients we have. But we know we're slightly different. Years ago, when, before people even were thinking of, dress codes and things, we didn't have ties at Lewis Silkin, and they've always been progressive in how they like to view, putting the human experience at the heart of the working relationship. So I'm proud of that, and I actually feel as Chief People Officer a real responsibility to make sure I never lose sight of. We can't take that for granted. We've got to carry on enhancing what works and listening to our colleagues.
Yeah, definitely. We've nearly reached the end of our time. I've got two more questions for you, and I'd like to sort of maybe reflect back on our time together today, and perhaps dial into a bit of an example that you can maybe share about in your career, and not necessarily, it doesn't have to be an example necessarily from Lewis Silkin, but over your time, you spent a lot of time helping people grow through change. Can you maybe share an example that really shaped how you think about talent development in those fast-moving environments?
I've got a really good example.
Excellent. I was hoping you would.
Do you know what? And I was thinking about this. It's such a great question. But so my example is, don't underestimate our early careers, our early talent, because when we were working through lockdown and everybody was saying, oh my goodness, I worked in an organisation, accountancy, with a lot of trainees. How are these people going to learn if they don't sit next to us? How are we going to make this work? There's such a heavy learning content. Yeah. And it was the youngsters, they made it work. They were alive to possibilities. They made sure they had catch up. So I think for me, it's don't underestimate our early careers, our young talent. They've got so much to offer. They've got great ideas, and they'll help us to work with them. So that's my example, really. And I always think of that. So sometimes when we're stuck, it's, that there's talent in all areas of the business. There's ideas in all areas of the business. It's not always for, the top levels of management, if you like, to have all of the answers. So that's my really standout example.
I think it's a great example, and it just as you were saying it then kind of made me smile, because you're right, and there's always such a great energy from the newer generations coming in. There's always such a great passion for and drive as well, because of course they're at the start of their journey. They're wanting to learn all this stuff, and so I think and in many cases that can often spark the fires again and reignite fires for people that have been in the jobs for a lot longer, and remind them of when they started in their careers. I think that's and again, this episode so full of perfect segues into my final question for you, which is, before I let you go, it's the question we ask at the end of every episode to all of our guests, which is that if you had the opportunity to speak to your younger self at the beginning of your career, and had that moment, that 5 minutes, what would be the advice that you'd give your younger self?
Okay, so I've thought about this a lot, and I think it is absolutely stay professionally curious. Make sure you're constantly asking questions, leaning into the areas you find most interesting, because I think actually it's so important that we have joy in our jobs as well. It's going to be difficult some days. It's not, we're not always going to have the perfect month or even, the perfect week, but there has to be elements of joy. And I think that in order to have a really fulfilling career, you have to lean into what you're interested in, because that is going to make you happy in your career, I think.
Yeah, professionally curious. It's not you might be interested in it. Not the first time I've heard that as a response.
Okay, interesting.
So I think, and it's so true. Like I suppose, and often my sort of challenge back is, do you think you live by that advice now?
Do you know, I think I do. I'm not sure it's always by design. There's always so much going on, isn't there? Particularly in today's landscape. It doesn't. You have to be professionally curious, don't you? Because there is so much going on and we can't possibly know all of the answers. But I think I have. I think I've always lent into new opportunities, new projects. I've always put my name forward for things that interest me. I've always, maybe when I was quite bold when I was younger, I would say, I can do that. Let me find out more about that. So I think I probably have. That said, I can probably do it even better. But I do think over the years I have tried very much to learn as much as I can, ask the questions I can, engage with people and learn from others. I really have.
Well, who knows, maybe even just by the end of today, you might have found yourself paying particular attention to being professionally curious, and even just by looking, who knows? But I can relate to it so much that exactly what you said about, especially at the beginning of your career where you're just sort of finding out about things, asking loads of questions. And I think, for me, it's the same. It's, well, so much so that it's led through to this moment where I find myself asking people questions on the podcast. There's that level of curiosity, and it finds you can always open new doors by asking questions and being curious. It's so true.
I think it's recognizing you don't have all the answers. So maybe it was that, always knowing that I don't have all of the answers. And in a people profession, there is no absolute correct way of doing things quite often. So I think that it's that recognition as well, knowing that you have to ask questions. You've got to listen to other people. You'll always learn from others because you don't have all the answers.
It's so true. Julia, thank you ever so much. You've been an amazing guest, and I've really enjoyed having a conversation with you today. So thank you ever so much for giving us your time. And I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have.
Thank you so much, Dan. I've loved this conversation. Thank you very much.
It's been great. Thank you. So that just leaves me to say that if you'd like to find out any more about Impact or of Lewis Silkin, or of course you'd like to explore our playbook that we mentioned earlier, then you'll find all of the links that you need in the description of where you found today's episode. So thank you one final time to Julia for joining me today. Thank you, Julia.
You're very welcome.
And until the next time, take care.
Hey, you're on my mind,